Hello, and welcome to the Student Learning Center. My name is Baylit. I am a peer tutor, and today I will be showing you the basics of Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Photoshop is a raster image editing software used by photographers, designers, and artists. The software allows users to enhance and manipulate images as well as create digital paintings. Users can crop, resize, color correct, and create multiple layers of images and effects to create unique compositions. So let's just jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to cover is how to create a new project. This opening window will show you all of your past projects that you've had, and you can very quickly use this menu to just grab one of these and pop it open. But if we're creating a new file, what we want to do is we can either click this New Project button, or New File right here, or we can go to File, New. There's also a Ctrl N or Command N if you're using a Mac. And from here a new window will pop up. This is where you can change the base settings for your project. So in this box, this is where we would set our title. So we will call this Photoshop Demo. And then moving down from here, this is where we can adjust the width, and this is where we can adjust the height. This allows us to change the units of measurement, so if you want to use inches instead of pixels, you can go ahead. This dictates the orientation, so whether you want to have it portrait or landscape. This is our resolution. 300 ppi is for printing, but for projects intended for the web, we should be using 72, or, if you want something bigger, 150. And color mode, down here, allows us to change between RGB and CMYK. Those are the two standard ones that you're going to want to use. RGB is standard for digital viewing, so if you're putting it up on the internet, you're going to want to use RGB. But CMYK is what you would use if you want to print something. This just changes the default so that if you want to have a black background instead of a white background when you open up a new project, or you can have a custom background or a transparent background, however you want to do that. Default is white, and that's what we're going to stick to though. All of this stuff over here is also presets that you could possibly use. These presets are going to be more along the lines of like printing, so like letter, legal, tabloid, that kind of thing. But for this, we're just going to use a custom. I am going to make this bigger though. We're going to set this to be 1080. So once we have all of our settings laid out the way that we want them, we just have to hit the Create button, and it'll automatically open a new file. That's a little larger than I intended, which is a really easy fix, and we're going to just go over that right now. You can go to Image, Image Size, or Canvas Size. And here we can actually change it from the settings that we originally input. So 2000 was too tall. We are going to do 1500 pixels. Then we would just hit OK. And there we go. Now we've resized this. So now we're just going to cover a few basics. The Windows toolbar right here is going to have a majority of the panels that you use in Photoshop. So all you'll really have to do is select Window and then select the panels that you need. You can also change your workspace under Window right here, though the Essentials workspace is default. So just keep that in mind. One of the main features of Photoshop is the Layers panel, which is something that we're going to talk about. So if you've never used layers before, layers act like sheets that are stacked on top of each other. Whatever is on top in the layers panel will always appear on top of your artboard. In order to create a new layer, all we have to do is select the icon in the layers panel to the left of the trash can, so this little plus sign right here, and that'll give us a new layer. You can also do this with a hotkey. For Windows, you'd want to use Ctrl-Shift-N, which will bring up this little box here, so you can actually rename the layer if you choose. And that hotkey would be Command-Shift-N for Mac. If you want to rename the layer, all you have to do is actually just double-click on the words of the layer itself and just type in something new. Hit Enter, and it'll set the layer name. Now, if you want to delete a layer, all you have to do is select the layer that you want to delete and then just hit the garbage can that was right there next to the new layer icon. It'll ask you. You can turn this off if you want. Just hit yes. It'll get rid of it. To duplicate a layer, all you have to do is select the layer that you want to duplicate, right-click, go to Duplicate Layer. You can rename this as well, and then just hit OK. Duplicate can also be done through a hotkey, Control for Windows, Command for Mac, and then just hit J. Ta-da! If you want to lock a layer, which keeps the layer from changing or being affected when you're messing around with things, select the layer and then click the lock icon in the layers panel above the layers. So this little guy right here. Now if you want to unlock this layer, all you have to do is just click that lock inside the layer itself. Background layers are typically locked by default, and the same applies. Just click on it and it'll go away. Now, organizing your layers is pretty simple. Just remember that the layer at the very top is going to show over the top of the layers beneath it. So in order to reorder your layers, all you have to do is click and drag on the layer you want to move, and you can just move it up and down in the layers panel. You can also create folders for organizing your layers, which is really useful if you're doing bigger projects. And all you have to do to create a folder is just tap on the folder icon that's next to the layer icon, this guy right here. Same thing applies, just double click if you want to rename it, and all you have to do is just drag layers directly into it, and it'll put them in a group together inside this folder. Resizing files. So you kind of saw me do this before. So to resize an image, all you have to do is select the layer that the image is on, and then go to Image, Image Size. And from here, we can mess with this again, as you saw me do earlier. In order to make sure that these stay consistent, however, you have to make sure that this is toggled on or off, depending if you want the aspect ratio to stay consistent. So if you're confused as to why you're changing numbers and it's changing your other number, just make sure that you turn that off so that you can actively mess around with it and kind of be a little bit more freeform with it. So to resize the canvas, all you'd have to do is go to Image, Canvas Size, and this is going to be a little bit different. So this lets you type in new dimensions for the current Photoshop document. You can choose if the canvas scales from a certain direction using this little box down here. And if you are adding size to an existing object, you can also choose what the background for the added area will be. I'll show that right here. So let's say that we're going to make this guy also 500, and we will scale it from the bottom. I think this is because we don't have anything on it yet. And the default is going to be transparent, so this is why we are seeing transparent on either side now. Okay, so now you know how to set the size for a document, but what about actually bringing things into the document, right? One of the easiest ways is we can actually just grab the thing that we want to bring in and just drop it on top. The difference here that you'll notice is this box, right? And that is because this is currently acting as a smart object. We can move it around and scale it, and the image will retain its resolution. Once we have it set where we want it to be set, though, we're going to hit Enter, and that is going to set it onto the page. That is going to make it a rastered image, which is going to be important now as we talk about the Free Transform tool. So in order to use the Free Transform tool, we're going to select the layer that we want to free transform. In order to activate the Free Transform tool, we can either hit Ctrl for Windows or Command for Mac, and then T, which will automatically activate it. Alternatively, we can actually go to Edit, Free Transform, and this will also activate the tool. This creates a bounding box around everything in the selected layer, and that's specified by a marquee or lasso selection. So this bounding box allows you to manually edit the object in these ways, right? So scaling the image, what we're going to do is we're going to hover directly over one of these little points, any of these little points, and we're just going to click and we can drag, and this is going to resize our image for us. Just a little quick tip, holding Alt or Option while dragging from any of these points allows you to scale directly from the center of the object. So the next thing we're going to talk about is rotating the object, which is very similar in that we just hover next to these points, click and drag, and there we go. Now we can also distort the image, so hovering over any point on the bounding box will reveal that same double arrow that we were talking about before, right? To distort it, we're going to hit Ctrl or Command, and this will allow us to distort the image instead of scaling. Again, press Enter to set, and there we go. So something to note is that scaling an image larger than the original is going to result in some kind of blurriness. So what we're going to try to do is use the largest and highest quality images, and what we really want to do is avoid making these guys really, really small and then making them really, really big. Because what that is going to do is give us a really blurred out image. If we want to avoid this happening, what we have to do is we have to make this thing a smart object instead. And in order to make it a smart object, what we're going to do is we're going to right-click, Convert to Smart Object, and you'll see that now we can scale this guy down and back up without losing any of our resolution quality. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are the tools. This guy over here is our tools panel, right? This is the move tool, which allows you to move the selected layer freely around the document. This is the Marquee tool, which allows you to make geometric selections on a specific layer, and then any modification that you make after making the selection will be applied to the area of this selection. But, mind you, this is only really going to work on rastered images. It is not going to work on a smart image. In order to turn a smart image into a raster image, all you have to do is right-click like you would when you were converting it to a smart object in the first place, and just go to raster layer. So on a rastered layer, we could theoretically go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and you see it's only going to change what is in the selected area by the Marquee tool. And something you're going to notice about almost all of the Photoshop tools is they have this little hang-on right here, and by clicking this, we can actually change the settings of these tools. So if we wanted a circle, or an ellipse, I should say, instead of a rectangle, we would just have to click on that instead. The next thing we're going to talk about is the lasso tool, which allows you to draw a custom selection in a single stroke. Which will function the same way. The little guys underneath the lasso tool are going to be the polygon lasso tool, which is similar in that you get to choose the shape, but you're just clicking on points and creating straight lines as opposed to just having free reign with the lasso tool. The magnetic lasso tool is going to use information that's already in the layer. So if we were to kind of circle around this guy, it's going to try to follow along the lines of our object. So the next tool that we're going to talk about is the crop tool, which is this guy right here. So the crop tool allows us to kind of crop in however we want. So if we wanted to make this smaller, it's just a little bit more freeform. Once you have it where you want it, all you have to do is hit enter. And there we go. There's usually a setting to keep or delete cropped pixels, and in general, you're going to want to not delete cropped pixels, because then if you have to move something around, you're going to lose pixels that would have normally been there. And then this guy is the eyedropper tool. And what the eyedropper tool does is it allows you to select colors that are already existing on your canvas, like so. And for those of you who are going into painting in Photoshop, a fun little trick is that if we were to be in, let's say, the paintbrush tool, if we were to hold Alt, it'll switch us over to the eyedrop tool so that we can select a new color, and then when we release Alt, it will take us back to the previous tool that we were using. This is most useful for painting, but it's really just a workflow thing. So, now we're actually going to talk about the brush tool, which allows you to sketch and draw and paint with ease. Once you have actually selected the brush tool, you can actually go up here, and this is where you can choose what kind of brush you want to use and how big you want that brush to be. Photoshop has a lot of pre-done brushes that you can choose from. But you can also access all of this through the brush window, which on my computer is over here because I have it set over here. But there is a brush and brush settings panel, which will allow you to get more in depth with what you're doing when you're editing your brushes. Same thing with the brush settings. If you take a Photoshop painting class, they will really go over this kind of stuff. But these are just more advanced options for when you're actually working with Photoshop brushes. And now that we've covered the brush tool, we're actually going to talk about the eraser tool, which is this guy. The eraser tool sounds pretty much exactly like what you would think it would be. It allows you to erase pixels on the selected area, revealing the layer underneath it. And there we have it. Then we also have the pen tool, which is this guy down here. And the pen tool is a little finicky. It allows you to create vector paths and Bezier curves that are used as selections or shapes. There are many complexities to this tool, but you should really just try it out. It's a little complicated, but because it works in vector, it's an extremely useful tool. Now we have the hand tool, this guy down here, which allows you to pan around the canvas. It really just helps for when you're like zoomed in and moving around. And much like with what we did with the eyedropper tool, if you're using another tool and you hold the spacebar, it'll activate this tool so that you can move things around, and once you let go, it'll change back. Another one of those workflow things. Moving down from there, we have the zoom tool, which does pretty much exactly what you would think. All you have to do is select the tool and then just right-click and drag your hand back and forth over the mouse, and it'll zoom you in and out. These guys down here are your foreground and your background color. Clicking on either one of them will allow you to change the color of the particular swatch. The top swatch is the foreground swatch and the bottom swatch is the background swatch. The top swatch, or the foreground swatch, will be used mostly for brushes or fill tools. Other important things to note is that pressing X will switch the foreground and background swatches, and pressing D will swap them back to black and white, which is their default. The foreground and background will also affect your gradient layer if you so choose to use the gradient tool. To use the gradient tool, you just have to click on it, and it'll give you these little dots. So you're going to click, hold, drag, and then let go. And it'll create a gradient using the swatch colors. So if I was to change this to red, we're going to get a different gradient using the red instead. Other kind of important tools, like I said, all of these guys usually have this little triangle down here that allow you to switch the tool type. Underneath the gradient tool is the paint bucket tool, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen before. All you really have to do is just click, and it'll completely fill in whatever is there with the paint bucket tool. That being said, if you were to have a raster layer open, it's only going to fill in all of the spaces that the space you clicked in touches. So it's a super useful tool, but you do have to be a little careful with it. Another tool that's kind of worth talking about would be the stamp tool. And this tool is a little bit finicky, and it's mostly used for photo editing specifically. But the way that this tool works is that once you have it selected, if you hold Alt, your mouse is going to change to this almost like target looking icon. And what you're going to do is you're going to select a point on the piece. So like right here. And then release Alt. And what the stamp tool does is it takes that selection and it allows you to put it somewhere else. And it'll move in tandem with what you're doing. It's a really fun tool and I highly recommend you mess around with it. Okay, so we actually only have a couple more things to cover. Hopefully this will give you a basic idea of this program just to get you started. So one of the last things we're going to talk about is adjustment layers. There's multiple ways to add them, but the simplest of which is to actually just go down to this button right here, which is the Create New Fill or Add Adjustment Layer, which is going to open up this little dialog box here, and it will give you a drop-down menu of all of the adjustments that you can add to said image, right? So for this, let's say hue and saturation. This will then open up all of the properties up in the Properties panel up here, and you can mess with the adjustment manually up here. When you've added an adjustment layer, it's going to put this little lock on it, and it's going to be right above the layer that you were adjusting. So as you can see, it's affecting this layer a lot, but if I was to turn on the other layer that we had, it won't affect this layer at all. If we want it to affect both of these layers, we can actually drag it up above this one, and it'll affect every one that is underneath it. If you want to apply adjustment to just a single layer, you must first select the Adjustment Layers panel and then press Alt-Option, and then hover above the layer that you want to apply the adjustment to. So now that we have this layer in place, Alt for Windows, Option for Mac, we're going to hover over this layer, and we're going to see this little square with a triangle pointing down, and we're just going to click. So now it's only applied to that layer, even though we have another layer underneath it. Now, one of the most useful tools that you are going to use in Photoshop is the ability to undo. The hotkey for this, for Windows, is going to be Ctrl-Z, and for Mac it's going to be Command-Z. In Photoshop, you have to set it so that you can undo multiple times usually, but for every time that you hit Ctrl-Z, it is going to go back a step that you did. Usually, in order to go back multiple steps, what you're going to have to do is hit Command, Control, and then Alt-Z, and that'll let you continue going back unless you change that in your personal preference settings. It's important to note that you can't be in the middle of another operation that has yet to be accepted when you go and undo multiple steps. If there is a crossed out circle or a check mark at the top of the screen, you have to accept or cancel whatever it is that you're doing before you can undo all those changes. In alignment with the undo, we also have to talk about the History panel. Now, if for some reason you don't see your History panel, what you're going to do is you're going to go to Windows, and you're going to scroll down to History. And this is going to show you everything that you've done. Using the history panel is just another great way to step back in time. So like I just undid all of these, but if I wanted to go back to something previous, or even go forward in time, back to before I undid all of that, this would be a good place to go and do that. And because it labels out specific brush tools, it's a little bit more organized. Now the last and arguably one of the most important steps that we're going to talk about is actually how to save your files. It's important to save your files frequently and always save the file as a Photoshop file first. That way if you need to go back and change things, you can still go in and it will retain all of your history. But after you've saved it as a Photoshop document first, then you can actually go in and save it as a PNG, a PDF, JPEG, whatever format that you want to use. In order to save something, all we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Save As, and automatically it's going to show us the Photoshop document first. So we're going to save our amount, just hit the save. And sometimes this will pop up, just hit OK. And once you've saved that for the first time, you can also just quick save. It won't let me, but if you've changed anything, it'll allow you to just save your progress in case Photoshop crashes. Now, to save it as something other than a Photoshop file, going to Save As can be a little bit difficult, depending on the version of Photoshop that you have, because automatically it's going to want to either make it a Photoshop file, a large document format, a Photoshop PDF, or a TIFF. Which if you're a game art kid, TIFFs are pretty good, but that's not really what we're looking for here. So go to Cancel. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, Save a Copy, and this will allow you to go in further and either save it as the Photoshop document, you could save it as a GIF, you could save it as one of the JPEG formats, PNG, Targa, TIFF, etc. We're going to save this one as a PNG, and simply hit Save. When this pops up, for PNG options specifically, it will usually also do something similar for JPEG, but not quite the same. If you want it to look the best, you're going to use the large file size. Medium and smallest are actually going to compress it down a little bit to make the file size smaller. So ultimately, usually you're going to want to use the large size file. And just hit OK. And then it should be saved into your documents. So here's the Photoshop file, and here's the PNG. So that is the end of our quick run through Photoshop. Hopefully you found this helpful. I would just say try to play around as much as you can, because practicing and learning on your own is always the best method of picking up programs like this. But if you're still having a rough time, you can always set up an appointment with the Student Learning Center. Thanks for watching.